All right, so we are live. It should be going out to everyone, everywhere.
Actually, let me switch my screen share.
All right.
To my other monitor.
So yeah, you bring up your screen share. There we go. All right. Let's add the stream.
So if you run Docker Swarm, or Kubernetes,
yeah,
I found Portainer very useful, especially if you're doing it for a hobby or small things. Because right here you see I have my local computer set up.
Yep.
I can see I have images, containers, volumes. I can look at all my volumes. Can look at stacks. And I'm just starting to set this up. But you can see I have Portainer running on this server. I have a few versions of Transmission, which is a BitTorrent client I'm setting up, and a sort of syncing from an old server to the new one. They also have app templates. So I'm going to bring up, let's bring up a GitLab instance. So I just want to deploy my HRNUG GitLab instance.
Everyone out there on the internet that's watching, we're not in the session yet. Drew is just giving us a demo of Portainer because we were chatting about it before we went live.
So also access control, user registration, bunch of stuff. And you can manage multiple servers through one instance of Portainer. And it's probably currently trying to download the images. So if I pull up images, you can see it's pulling NGIX, probably for the GitLab. Pulling more stuff. So it's going to take time to go through that. So I could also see things about the host. And a little i5 on this machine's really chugging down.
You're taxing it.
Yeah.
So everyone watching, Drew's showing off Portainer. It's basically running on this, what'd you call it, a mini tower?
Yes, so
micro tower. It's a little piece of hardware, but it's holding its own right now.
Yeah. So the Opti collects 3070 micro.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Small. Oh, so okay. That's taking a while. So I'm going to just go in. I'm going to take this and show you some things. If I try and duplicate this container, we can see things like pulling the image, setting the image, some access control through the Portainer interface, and then we get to everything here. You can add volumes, manage the network, manage the environment, labels, restart policy, runtimes, and resources. So I can do memory reservations, limits, CPU limit, capabilities. Though I don't currently do anything with Kubernetes or Docker Swarm, it also has the ability to set up with those. And it just makes, if you're in Docker just infrequently, it just makes doing things easy. Like one of the biggest things I need to do is, I need to come in and update this container. Let's just recreate and tell it to pull the latest image. And it'll do just that. It'll
very nice.
turn off the container, pull the latest image, delete the container and restart it with all the same settings.
So is this in addition to Docker Desktop, or is it in a replacement to Docker Desktop?
It's sort of its own thing, separate from Docker Desktop.
Okay, cool.
It is a Docker container itself. So you can see it runs in Docker. We can see the image layers. That's the actual image. If I look at my container, I also see what ports I have mapped. So I have 8,000 and 9,000 port mapped to it. I have an entry point, the environment variables I've set, start policy, and I've given it access to the docker.socks file on the host in a data container for storing all that. Let's see. I think something's gone wrong. Let's see if there's anything in events. Oh, the image was pulled. So I have GitLab image pulled, but it didn't actually pull anything.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Okay.
Doesn't like spaces. There we go.
Yeah, awesome.
I can view logs.
We'll have to take a look at this. This looks handy.
Yeah.
I've thought about setting up a machine in my network that's just Docker all the time.
And I can also just bash into it in the container. So look at this. We can see it's on 57073. So if we go localhost or yeah. Oh no, I need 7.5 for the. Maybe it's not quite set up yet. Let's take a look at the logs. Oh no, it's still starting up.
So they're the same.
But that is Portainer. Again, user management. So you can create users, share it out, teams, roles. You can have multiple agents, Docker, Kubernetes, Azure. You can set up registries, download backups. You can set up LDAP, OAuth, registry or authentication for this. Bunch of other stuff. And the site,
Cool.
Portainer.
Portainer. All right, so there you go, folks. If you're just tuning in, we haven't kicked off yet. Drew was just giving us a demo of Portainer. Thank you for that, Drew. I'm actually going to write that down because I'll look at that when I get home. Because I've thought about doing exactly what you're doing as well. But hi, everybody. Welcome to the Hampton Roads.net users group. I'm Kevin. To my right is Drew. That way, Drew. Drew is a co-organizer. And our special guest tonight is Mr. Brian Gorman. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, we're glad you're here. So I'm currently in Kansas City for the Kansas City Developer Conference. Brian can't be in Kansas City, but he is representing Kansas City with his
make it see.
AC
There we go.
jersey.
I should see. Backwards. It's hard to do when you're mirror image.
See, it's right side of us, so we can see it just
perfect.
And I wish I knew we were wearing that. I would have brought mine with me, and we could have coordinated. But that's all right. Maybe next time.
Yeah.
Shout out to everyone on either Twitch, YouTube, or LinkedIn. We're glad you're with us. We're not going to stall anymore. We're just going to let Brian take over. So Brian is going to talk to us about Azure API Management and all the good stuff that comes with that. So Brian,
I don't know
I
about
am
all the good
bringing up
stuff.
all the good. Okay, so just scratch the surface of the good stuff.
Yeah, right on.
And
We're gonna get a good overview here. And I, depending on what your level is with functions or API, there may be some stuff here that you've seen, and there may be some new stuff, and a little bit of identity we get to work in, which is kind of always a tricky thing to mess around with. So hopefully we'll have the demos go well here. The demo gods can be nice to us tonight. But I've tried it a couple times and haven't had many issues, so hopefully that's a good omen. So again, thanks for having me, guys. Thanks for having me in your group here. I was recently awarded Azure MVP for this year for my first Microsoft MVP. And it's a real great honor, and part of that is doing events like this, and you guys providing an event like this for me to do this is always an awesome thing. And so again, I appreciate it. You can see that I'm an MCT, so as an MCT, it does me well to get extra certifications. So I have a few Azure certifications that I've earned over the last couple of years here. And I also recently wrote a book called Practical Entity Framework, which is a book on .NET Entity Framework. It was written with .NET EF Core 3, 3.1, excuse me. And so even though I have a book out there, this is going to be weird. I'm going to say don't buy it because actually there's a second edition that is going to publication as we speak, and it will be out in November, and it's on EF Core 6. And so hopefully that one will do as well as the first one. I would love to connect with you. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, that's great. I'm at BL Gorman. I kind of, goof around on Twitter. If you would like to make a professional connection, a better way to do that is LinkedIn. I'm an open networker, so I will accept all connections that don't look creepy or too salesy. I'll even take salesy ones sometimes. So, but I'm LinkedIn.com, LinkedIn/in/Brian L. Gorman. So you can find me there. Yeah, I'd love to connect with you. And network, talk shop, whatever you want to do. Talk about how awesome the college football weekend was, or whatever it might be. So I'm good. I'm up for all that. All right. So without further ado, let's move into the actual thing here. So what I'd like to cover today is what it takes to get set up to actually do what we're about to do. And I did prefab a few things just to try to make this talk go a little more smoothly. And there are a couple things we're going to do live together as well. We're going to lock down the Function app after we see how it works and how everything is connected. We're going to enable the identity login so that we can make sure that only our Active Directory authorized users can actually get to our Function app. So that's going to be our security level. We're going to be looking at the APIM and how we create the managed identity in that in order to make sure that it can authenticate in the Active Directory. We'll be looking at then wiring up the APIM to leverage the Function app. And we'll talk about products and subscriptions and what that means within API management and how we can make that work so that we can have the ability to literally have one facade in front of all of our backend functions that allows our clients to have the right input into the right places, and we don't have to give them a bunch of different links with a bunch of different function keys. And we'll talk about some of the pitfalls that we'll hit along the way, and just other further information that we're going to see as practical things happen as we start developing here. Well, it's not really developing, it's all going to be in the portal, and it's just a lot of configuration and such. And so it's actually quite intuitive once you've done it a few times, but the first couple times it's like, what is going on? So I'll show you some of the pitfalls I've had to help you so that when they happen to you, you might remember and be able to fix it. So the good news is that's it for slides. Everything else in this talk is going to be a live demo, and we're just going to push through it, and it should be a great chance for us to dive in and just really see how all this works together. So what I want to do is first start off just talking about what I've already got set up, simply because you would have to have this all set up as well. In order for us to have a good API management solution, we need to have behind the scenes an application insights with a log analytics workspace. And so I've already got that built out. And then also I've built in an Azure Function App. So hopefully you've seen creation of a Function App. If not, it's straightforward. Basically, you just go out to create a Function App or whatever. And this is nothing fancy at all. It's just a .NET 3 Function App. And so you would select your resource group, name it something useful. You can do it in a code or Docker container. I'm doing .NET. I am doing .NET 3.1, but you want to see something exciting? Functions version 4. Look at that. We got preview version for .NET 6 coming out. So I'm assuming that will also include .NET 5, but maybe they're just going to have everybody upgrade to 6 right away. So that's pretty cool. Of course, your resource, whatever region you're in. When you do this, of course, you can host it different ways. You can host it on Linux or Windows. I'm just doing consumption, but you can do premium plans. You can add networking if you want to have some private networking endpoints into, securing your functions that way on your network. And of course, application insights on it, and then tags and create. So we don't need to do this because I've already created a one for us to use. And then just to show you a little bit more about that, to make this very easy, I just use a public repo to deploy it. And so you could actually do that as well. The Git repo is it's B.O. Gorman Simple Function App Demo. It's not much. It has 2 functions in it, a function 1 and a get people, so that we can have kind of a separation of what we might pretend like we want public clients to see and what we might want paying clients to see, just to kind of have a little bit of segregation there for our actual demo. But ultimately, you just wire that up on the deployment center. You just choose the external Git in this case. If you have, this is another cool thing they've added into Azure Functions as well. If you actually have a repo, you can just point to your repo and it will build a GitHub action for you. And you can automatically deploy that GitHub action into your repo and have the pipeline built from Azure now. You can literally just select it. It's really cool. But I just did the external Git since this is a public repo that likely simulates me not actually having ownership of it, but just being able to use it and the branch and such. And so it's going to build that out. And then anytime you need to, if I push something to the repo here, I would have to manually sync up here at the top just to keep up with it since it's not an action. But again, there's just 2 functions in this. The function 1 is just a simple hello world function that you get with every single .NET Azure function that you run or Azure Function App project, which ultimately says, you're going to enter your name here. If you don't enter your name, it says pass it in. So you say name equals, and we're just going to do HRNUG. And so it says, hello, everybody. It's triggered successfully. So we know it's working. We have that working. The other function is just this get people. And the get people is going to be a function app. Let me just turn this Azure mask off for a second. It actually has a function code. So if you're not familiar with how that works, you can set 3 different levels of security, sort of security around your functions. You can have an anonymous access, which function 1 is anonymous. You can have a function code, which that's what this is. But this is only as good as your worst player with this key. Once this public key is out there and someone does something with it, of course you're basically at the mercy of whoever it is. And it's really a difficult task to track who is doing it in this case, because it's just one code that everybody's using. And so what we'll see with API management is that will give us a lot more control over that down the road. And we don't have to worry about everybody having the same key. And we can also do some more things to throttle or work against bad players if they start misusing our APIs, which is cool. So this is going to give us the basic people. It's just a list of people, a few superheroes and a couple of Johnsons and Smiths so that I could actually append onto here. Let's see. So that's the code, and name is, let's just do Smith and just kind of limit the results. So that's the functions, and they're super awesome, really powerful stuff there, but it gives us enough to play with and have the idea. So it's good to know what we have there. And so what I want to do now is walk us through an actual deployment of an API management so that we can get this set up. I could have prefabbed this, but I think there's enough talking points here that most people maybe aren't as familiar with. So I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to see some of that. Some of you are going, but it takes 45 minutes to deploy API management. And that's true on certain subscription plans, and I'll talk about that in a second here. So ultimately, we're going to do everything in the East US, just easier. And this will just be called APIM. We'll do Hampton Roads, Net User Group, and live demo or something. So just doesn't have to be empty. Organization name can be whatever you want. So I just do like example org and example at example.com. They don't do any kind of validation on these emails. So here's what I was talking about the different versions. And so we're going to do a consumption version, which takes just a couple minutes to deploy. And it isn't as powerful as some of the others. And so limitations on this are going to give us, we won't have the developer site that you get with a full API management, where your developers can then come in and see all your APIs, kind of like a Swagger screen almost, where it lists out what you've done and also allows them to request access, where you can then validate, yes, I want this developer to get a token, gives them the token, and they can then, be a developer against your API. What we're going to do is we're just going to expose public endpoints. So we're going to use the consumption. So that developer version, the basic, standard, and premium, they all have different things. You see a little bit better SLAs, different things with networking, some other features that you get as you go up, scalability, such as that we won't be able to do with the consumption plan. But we're going to go ahead and just do the consumption plan. You can have 20 of them per subscription. So that's pretty cool too, if you need that many. Again, we want an Azure Insights here. So I'm just going to use the application insights. So I'm just going to use the one we created for the Hampton Roads Net user group earlier today. So you guys didn't have to wait for me to do that. So again, here you see the developer and consumption tiers don't allow scaling. So if you want that, you have to go further to one of the standard, basic, or premium plans. Managed identity. This is probably the most critical piece for what we're doing today when we're deploying our API management solution. If you don't do this here, you're okay, because you can still turn it on. Just like any other Azure resource, you can turn on the managed identity. I'm just going to go ahead and turn it on here, just so that I don't have to worry about that later. I'll show you where it is in case you have one and you decide you want to do this. I'll show you how to turn that on. It's super easy to do. Again, virtual networking requires a different version. So if you want to have private endpoints on your own virtual network, you need basic, standard, or consumption tier. The protocol allows you to backfill for some older protocols. So if you wanted to turn on HTTP2, one of the older TLSs, or one of the SSL3, you can actually do that if you would need to. I don't need to today, so I'm just going to skip that. And then generally, you can do tags on anything. So whatever you want to do here. We'll just do live demo for Hampton Roads Net user group. And of course, everything gets tags or no tags. It's up to you. But it will take just about 2 minutes for this to deploy and get out there. That gives us just a little chance to quickly just dive into a quick little Postman thing. So I'm going to be using Postman a lot. If you went out to the actual repo that I posted earlier, I don't know if you guys can see that, but also it's just the simple function app demo. I did include the functions here that I have for the, whatever you call the requests here, and then also an environment. So I have this environment already prefabbed, ready to go, and I'm just going to fill in some values. I've already put in the function app name, and I've already put in the function app code for the get people function. And so basically at this point, I can go ahead and send this information in, and it will work just exactly like we would expect it to. And I have some prefab calls for the API instance here as well, getting people with that name of Smith. And then ultimately, we're going to see in a minute a third-party API as well. So we'll have all that ready to go. Okay, so this deployment is taking just a little bit longer than I expected. Hopefully it won't take too much longer. There we go. Cool. So there's our API management solution. So if you're not familiar with this, there's a couple of really critical pieces you want to know. Of course, you need to have your URL. This is what everybody's going to see by default, your public facing URL, and then you'll put your APIs behind that. Now you can also do your own custom host naming and such, so that you don't have to you could expose whatever endpoint you wanted to make it look like. We're just going to leave the default one for this demo. What I'm going to do is go ahead and grab the name of that, because I'm going to need it ultimately for this APIM instance, and I'm going to drop that in here before I forget. And then we'll have some subscription keys here in a moment as well. So, okay, so when we get into API management, we have a couple of other things we need to set up. The first thing we need is some APIs to actually call to different places. So we're going to have 3 APIs that we're going to create today. One of them is going to be to a third-party site. It's basically the government's vehicle site, and we're just going to make a simple call to get all of the makes that are done by Honda. In this case, you could change that if you want to. So since it's a third-party site, I'm just going to use a blank API, and we'll see later we're going to use this function app down here. You could also do logic app services if you wanted to have your own API. If you wanted, this is actually really cool. Something I just saw today. There was a demo for one of my coworkers. He runs a thing called the Azure Back to School event. And the demo for today was on API management through using Swagger Hub. And he built out the entire API code first. And then he brought it in. He went to this open API session, and he was able to just drop in that JSON and really create his API. It was really cool. So you can do that too. Of course, there's some of the other things, SOAP and RESTful stuff that has been out there forever, WebSocket. But we're going to go ahead and just do a blank API in this case. And so over here, you'll see there's the choice to go basic or full. And on full, it's going to ask me for products. Well, right now, I don't have any products defined. And it says to publish the API, you must associate it with a product. Well, that just means to publish it to the world. It has to be out there. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and create this API. It's going to be called vehicles. And then I'm going to give this web service URL, which is ultimately going to be the government site for vehicles. And so I can give you that link here. I'll just drop it in chat in case anybody cares to do this later. It's just one I happen to pull out because it's easy, and it shows what I wanted to show. So then this is probably the most critical part, because this is what people are going to see when they want to get to it. So this is kind of your root for this specific API. So again, here I'm going to type vehicles. You see that vehicles is appended here as I type that. If I change it, it changes there, etc. So even though I've named it vehicles, I need to repeat that here if that's what I want to call it. And that's what I want for today. So I'm going to do that. So you see there's my vehicles API. And right now it has one call. And so if I go out here and try to test this, so I just hit the test button up here, and I didn't give an operation. So that didn't work. So what I need to do first to my API is add an operation. So you can have as many operations as you want. And this is going to be get Honda makes. And so ultimately there, I need to drop in the rest of the API call. So the root was that vehicles government API. This is the specific call I'm doing. And so this is just going to be getting all the makes by Honda. And you can put some tags on there if you want. And you can see you can also mess around with query headers, request and response as well here. And so there's my operation now. So now when I go to test, I can go ahead and do this. I can actually add a parameter here if I want to, or add headers to it. You see that there's this request URL, and you see down here a couple things: OCP APIM subscription key and OCP APIM trace. Those aren't important right now, but they will be soon. So we're just going to leave this as is, and we'll go ahead and send it. And we see we've got a 200 OK, and we see all the makes by Honda. So this is awesome. We're hitting a third-party API, simulating, we might have a facade in front of some other API that we ultimately have that we're exposing to paying clients, but we don't necessarily want them to even know they're using it. And so now we could say, okay, if you want to get information about your vehicles, go to our vehicles API, type in, whatever, and it'll send off the data. So let's go see what happens if I try to get my Hondas in my API instance. I get a 401, access denied due to invalid subscription key. I don't know if I can make this bigger. Yeah, there we go. So basically it's telling me your access is denied. Well, why is that? I didn't do anything different, and it worked from the web. Well, that's the first piece of the puzzle is that in order for me to be able to access the API from the public end, I need to create a product with subscriptions so that I can then get a key to give to my clients. So I could give them my full subscription key, but I don't want to do that. And then they could just put that in there. So the first thing I'll do is create a product. And so that's going to be vehicles. And this is just going to be the vehicles for paying customers or something. And I'm going to go ahead and click on published. If I didn't, it's easy enough to toggle it later. This requires approval, allows me to tell the developer versions and better if I want to make sure that people who want to develop against it need to get a subscription approval. And then you can set the number of subscription limit here if you want. You can also add in legal jargon if you need to, and you can select APIs. But this is really like, I don't know what's wrong with this thing, if it's Chrome or what, it just doesn't seem to work very well. So I'm going to go ahead and just create this, and then what we'll do is we'll drill in and we'll just add the API up here. So I'm going to select the vehicles API into this product. And ultimately then I want to have with this product now some subscriptions. So I'm going to go ahead and create a subscription. And the name of the subscription is going to be Vehicles Basic. So the name of your subscription has to be unique across your entire API management solution. So if you just type basic here, you can't have basic on any other subscriptions as your name, but your display name can be repeated. So I always just preface with the name of the product I'm in and then the subscription as my name, and then I just display it as basic. The next step is this allow tracing. And what tracing does is allows you to generate a trace on your blob storage that's backing this, and it basically then allows you to set a header to true. You can do that within Postman or within the test window. It allows you to see that trace log if you want to. So you can turn this on if you want. I'm not sure if that affects your performance overall. It may have a little bit of an impact, so you might want to test that out on your own and see if you're doing this in prod. You might not need that or want it, but it's really handy if you need to debug. So we're going to go ahead and leave that on. And you see that it gave me two keys, a primary and a secondary. So what I generally like to do is I like to give the secondary key out so that I can rotate that for reasons. And then I have my primary key for my internal stuff. And that way, if I rotate a secondary key, my internal stuff should still work. It really doesn't matter. You just need to give one of them. You can regenerate the primary or the secondary. You can suspend it. You can delete it, whatever you need to do here. You can also show and hide your keys. So I'm going to grab the secondary key here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Postman. And I'm going to drop that into my variable for the vehicle subkey. And we'll save that up. And then ultimately, let me show you how that works. On this call, in the headers, you see this OCP APIM subscription key, and it's going to inject that subkey in there, and it'll allow me to then send that subscription key in. So now that I have a subscription, I get my stuff back, which is really cool. So my public API is now exposed through my instance via that subscription. If somebody does something bad, I could rotate the key. If I had a developer version or better, I can actually limit the rate of requests against that specific key or against IP. You can have an IP throttling or the key throttling, which is really cool. You can create multiple subscriptions. You can have a premium subscription and a basic subscription, limit the basic subscription so your premium customers have priority essentially. Cool stuff you can do there. The other thing I want to show you is, so this API itself has a format equals JSON appended query string variable that I can do. And if I do that, it comes back as JSON. Well, I want that to be the case for everybody. I don't want them getting XML. And I don't want them to have to remember to put, question mark format equals JSON on their call. So how do I make it so that they don't have to do anything and they always get JSON? It's actually quite simple. You go back to your API. And so in my vehicle API here, what I'm going to do is I can do this at 3 different levels, and we'll see this again in a minute as well. But we can do it at the entire API level, which doesn't make sense when I'm doing this for a specific API. We can do it at the API level specifically. So here, oops, now it's going to spin on me. Come on. I'm impatient. Okay, here we go. So you can do it at the all operations level, or you can do it at a specific call. So here we'll do it on the specific call. It's just for this one. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a policy to the inbound processing. Note also that these inherit from top to bottom. So all APIs would be the first one evaluated, the OWL operations will be the second one evaluated, and this one would be the third one evaluated. So we're going to go add this in, and you can see there you can do mock responses. So you can do some testing against it and pretend like you actually hit something. You can do rewrites. You can do query parameters, headers, cross origin, validate JWTs, and you can also do other policies, which we'll see in a moment. But ultimately, we're going to do query parameters. So what I'm going to do is do format, and then I need to add a value for JSON, and we're just going to select override, because we're just going to always use it. If somebody puts some other format in there, we still want it to be JSON. So we're going to not let them pass through XML or something else, because we're saying it has to be JSON. So I'm going to save that. And now when I go back to my Postman and make my call, you see that it comes back as JSON, even though I didn't append it onto the call. So everybody who makes a request now, they're being injected with that format equals JSON into their policy here, and they don't have to worry. We don't have to worry about them making the mistake of not remembering that, and we also ensure that they're getting it in the value we want. So in order for this to work now, we need two other functions, or two other APIs. So the first one we're going to add is going to be, well, they're both going to come from the Function app, but we're going to pretend in this case that we have a public facing that we want everybody to use, and then we're going to have a client facing that we want just our paying customers to use. So we can go ahead and select our Function app from our subscription, and it finds all the ones you have, so make sure you select the right one. And then ultimately you select what functions you want to include. So in this one, we're going to include both functions. We're going to pretend these are our paying customers, and then we'll select that. And here what we'll say is this is going to be, the display name is going to be customers. And then ultimately this API URL suffix is also going to be customers. And you see that's just the same thing as we did with vehicles before. Again, you can do tags, you can do products. You can also do versioning, which I haven't really shown, but you can actually start versioning it at this point as well. But you can version it later too, so you don't need to do that now. Same thing with adding products later. So we'll go ahead and build out this one for the customers, and then let's do one more API for our everybody. So this is going to be the same function app in this demo. Likely in the real world, you would have multiple function apps or logic apps or your own web API, whatever you're connecting to, or just the same function app with, again, just a limited scope. So here again, we're going to do just that function for everybody. We're ultimately going to call this public. I should type there first. Okay, so this is just going to be called public. So we'll go ahead and create that. And okay, so we have our customers and our public, and hopefully it's not case sensitive because I forgot to capitalize a P, but that shouldn't matter. And then again, we could test these real quick just to make sure everything's working. Locally, it's probably a good idea to make sure you're getting 200s on this at this level, that things aren't wired up in a bad way. So we're getting 200s, that's what we expected. And we need a couple more products. So again, we need a product for customers. And this is just our customers, and publish that. And we're not going to do anything with those, but again, we could add multiple APIs here. We'll do one for public as well. We'll call this everybody.
Brian, there's a good question in the chat. Sure. Since you're kind of talking about it, can you do conditional access based off IP addresses?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So in
or
the policies,
maybe IP address range.
Yeah. So I think there will be multiple ways to accomplish that. If you're on your own virtual network on one of the more expensive versions, absolutely, you're controlling your ingress. But on these consumption ones, what I would think you would have to do is apply a policy. And again, at the consumption level, honestly, the policy doesn't let you do it by IP or by key. You have to be at the developer level on those as well. I think it'll just say it's a subscription level only.
Gotcha.
So I would have to look into it a little more to see, how I would throttle by IP at this level. But it likely is possible. I'm just not sure how to do it.
If you're willing to pay for it, is usually the answer.
Yeah. So on those policies that we were doing earlier, that's where you would be adding in additional things to throttle by IP or by subscription key. And so I could actually show you where that is in just a second. We have to go back in there anyway. Just hopefully I'll remember. And key throttle. Okay. So I wanted to also show you that subscriptions themselves can be created here. And this is where it could get a little bit tricky if you go off the rails and create the subscription at the wrong level, but it could also be useful depending on what you're trying to do. So you can add a subscription and you can go against all APIs, a specific API, or a specific product. So subscriptions don't have to be limited to just one product, which is actually kind of cool. We're going to just do products, but for the real world, you might span a couple products if you wanted to. Maybe you have an admin subscription or something that needs to get into all of them. All right, so this is going to be everybody again, and the display name is just going to be everybody. It does well, shoot, this is going to be everybody basic, and this is basic, and we will just allow the tracing for whatever reason, and we'll select the everybody subscription and go ahead and create that. The other way to do it is to go into your actual product itself. So here's our customer's product, and we can create subscriptions here directly. That knows it's at the product level right away. So here we'll just do customers basic, and we'll just call that basic. And just to show that you can do it, of course, we'll do our customers premium. And that gives us multiple subscriptions on the product. So again, I need to select APIs here. So this is where I can say I want the customer's API, but note that I could also bring in the vehicles if I wanted to. So it's not limited, it's not a one-to-one relationship. So here I'm doing one-to-one just for simplicity, but if you needed, you could have multiple APIs into your product, which is again another way to create those different levels of access for different clients. All right, so we have one more I did not add yet to the product for everybody, the API for everybody, the public API. All right, so now those are all there, and I just need to get my subscription keys into Postman. So bear with me 1 second here. So I need my product customers premium subscription key, and I'm going to drop that into my API, to my Postman. So this is the client sub key in this case. And then the public sub key is going to be the one from the products. So that's going to be this product everybody. So we'll just grab the key off of that as well and drop that into Postman. And I'll go ahead and save all that. And then hopefully now when we hit our APIM, here's our public function one using the subscription key that we put in there. We're good. And then of course we got our get people and our get people with filtering and our get vehicles, which we already know works. So at this point, everything is wired up, all the functions work, but we haven't secured our function app. So that's the next step of the puzzle. So right now, anybody in the world can hit my functions if they have the endpoint. And that's provable by just getting the function itself, getting the function URL, taking that and dropping it into a browser, and there's my results. And if you had that, you could get those results yourself. So I need to block that and make sure that everybody who's accessing my functions are the people I want to access them. So to do that, I need to go to Authentication underneath the Azure Function App itself. So when I go to Authentication, it's going to ask me to add an identity provider. And while I do this, it's going to actually create an app registration in Azure for this as well. So my identity provider is going to be Microsoft in this case, but you see you could also use Facebook, Google, Twitter, OpenID, whatever your flavor of choice is. So this is interesting. What do I want it to be? A new app, or do I want it to be one that's already there? So since I want a new one, in this case, I'm going to select that. But if you had already created an app in your Azure Active Directory that you've got authentication against, you could literally pick that one from your app registration directory, or you could provide the details of the client ID, a client secret, and a URL. And then that would give you the ability to just wire this function app up with the identity that you're already using on another app registration. In this case, I'm just doing one-to-one for simplicity and to make sure I don't cross-pollinate with other things. But you could go the level of using one that's already there. I'm also going to use any Azure Active Directory and personal Microsoft accounts. This is coming in through one of my personal Microsoft accounts, so I have to do that. If you were just on a current tenant, single tenant, you could do that. If you want to do multi-tenant, which may be useful if you're doing like B2C, business to customer access or something, you have multiple tenants within your organization or whatever, that you need to have multiple access to this, you would do that, of course. You can also limit it to personal Microsoft accounts. And then this is interesting, but if you want this to work correctly, you need to make sure you're requiring authentication. So I'm not really sure if you allow authenticated access. I guess maybe the public repo or the public function that has an anonymous function signature maybe would go right through without being authenticated, but we want to lock everything down, so we're going to require authentication. And then finally, the unauthenticated requests. Now I'm looking at this and I got 302s, found redirect, recommended for websites, 401, unauthorized, recommended for APIs, and 403, forbidden. Now, when I'm looking at this and I'm thinking I'm making an API, I think you would think what I thought, which is take 401 because it says recommended for APIs. Well, that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to take that. I'm also going to leave the token store, so it just stores stuff behind the scenes so people can, do all their token refresh and all that jazz with identity. So I can also do permissions here outside of just basic user.read. So you can add any of the other graph permissions that you want to add if you wanted to do other things along the, the identity platform. Oh, crud. I just broke it because I took out my user.read. All right, so let's make sure user.read is in there. Shoot. Okay. And I think I accidentally put profile in there, so now I want to take that one back out. Hold on. So I got to add a permission to remove it. Interesting. So yeah, you get to see me flub around a little bit there, but that's cool. Now you know how to do it too. All right, so I'm going to add this in. Now remember that I selected the 401 with the API-based authentication. The other piece of the puzzle that's really important here is the client ID. I'm going to need this later. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this right now and drop it where I need it in my notes so that I don't lose it. But if I don't get it here, which I can always come back to the authentication page and it'll be right here, I can always go to my app registrations as well. So if I go to my portal and just go into my app registrations here, when this comes up, I can find the app registration I just did, which was that APIM functions for the Hampton Roads user group. There's my ID right there. But if you drill into this, I can actually see the application ID here, other information. This is another interesting piece of the puzzle, redirect URIs. So if you want to actually try to get Postman to connect, which is a non-trivial thing, by the way, but possible, I've done it once, you're going to need another redirect URI. So you drill into here and you would add in a platform for desktop and probably point that at localhost. And then you would have to have that so that the Postman can actually get in and make that work. So if any of you know how to do that really well, I would love to have that information because it's not trivial. It seems like it should be, but it seems harder than it should be. Anyway, this is where the application client ID is. And just in case you're also not aware of this, if you were trying to build your own authentication for some reason, or if you needed to wire up, all of your endpoints are right here. And so you can select that and get all of your endpoints for this function, for this app registration, excuse me. But these are never going to change. These are all just the Microsoft endpoints. And that depends on whether you're doing a single tenant or a multiple tenant. It'll be different if it's multiple tenant. And then a graph endpoint and such, different endpoints for SAML, whatever you want to do. If you ever need them on your app registration, that you find them right there. All right, that's more than you needed for this thing, but always good information. You can also add secrets if you wanted to. In your certificates and secrets, you could come in here and add a secret. You can also do certificates as well. So just different things you could do around that to kind of further the puzzle here. All right, so we've locked down our functions now, and we've built this function app. So when I hit this, it says you don't have permission to view this directory or page. Well, that's kind of what I wanted. I mean, it's blocking me. That's good. And if I go to Postman and hit it, what you'll see is I get the same 401. I don't have access. Same thing for this function. So that's cool. It's blocked. Oh, okay, but I mean, this should let me log in, right? Well, if you remember, I said that 401 versus that 302, that was the error. So that's why I wanted to recreate that for you so you could see me flub through it. And remember, if this ever happens to you, why your users can't sign in directly and use it. Now, maybe you don't care. This is maybe not a bad thing, but I don't think the APIM instance would be able to work without it either. So what we need to do is find the authentication page, again, where we created this before, and we need to edit the settings here. So that's here. And we're just going to change this to a 302 and save that. And by doing that now, provided everybody, provided it works correctly, oh shoot, did I save it? Did I just not give it enough time? There we go. Okay, so I was just too quick on the gun. Okay, now it's going to let me log in, which is what I want. So now that I can authenticate and get that direct redirect pass through to my app, now I can see my data. So it's still locked down. If I go out to my Azure Functions here, and I'm just a rando user, not logged in, I still get the 401. So the only people that can currently get into my Azure Function app functions at this point directly are people that have been authorized into my Active Directory. So I could further lock down the Active Directory role-based control around that Azure function to limit who can actually still log in. But at this point, I'm just going to leave it open. But if you needed to go to a more granular control, that's where you would want to do that. So now what though? If we go back to our APIM, what's going to happen? So our functions are locked down. And in our API, somehow I got multiple function apps open here. 3 function apps open here. All right, so here's our API. Oh, let's see. Yeah. Okay. So here we go. So if I go to my customers and I go try to do any of my functions at this point, and I'm going to test it from within, I'm going to get 401 unauthorized. Well, what's going on? Like this is an authenticated app. This is an authenticated app in my Active Directory. Why can't it connect? And there's one more piece of the puzzle that's very hard to find and very tricky. And hopefully they don't ever make it stop working and change it, because I don't want to have to figure this out ever again in my life. But ultimately, you have to add a policy in order to let it through, to tell it what app you're going against. So what I'm going to do to fix this is I'm going to go into each of my APIs. Now I could do this on the all API level, but since this is going to be a problem for just my internal stuff and not the vehicles, it doesn't really make sense to inject a policy at the all API levels at this case. So I'm going to do this on the customer level. So on the inbound policy here, I'm going to add a policy. So here you see your filter IP addresses. So if you wanted to, you could drill that in and put some blocked IPs here. Let me just see if this works. It might actually work in the consumption. This is not a real good IP, obviously, for the world, but so it actually did let me save that. So you can do IP filtering in the policy here on the consumption. That's pretty cool. So I'm going to take that back off because I don't want it, just in case it breaks something. But you can also do a limit call rate. Now, this is where it's, so you can, say I want 1,000 calls in the next 60 seconds, limited by subscription, by IP address, or by custom. And so this may be interesting because it's going to inject this. Let's see if we can just do, any requests coming in. If they do more than that, we'd be blocking them. Let's see what happens if we hit save. Oh my goodness, they let me do it. Okay, so yeah, okay, they didn't. So in the consumption, you can't do this, but this is how you do it in the other ones. You get the context subscription key. So that's going to do the throttling by the specific keys. So now your different users can have different throttle rates depending on how you want to do that. So if you create, an entry point for your premium they get a better rate than the other people. And so you can do these at the all API level. You can do them at the individual API level. You can do this all the way down at the function level. Unfortunately, for whatever reason in the consumption, they don't let me rate limit, which is probably the one place I'd want it more than any, honestly. So that's unfortunate. Maybe they'll change that in the future. Maybe there's a reason that's beyond my understanding that that's making sense to them. So, all right, but right now, if we still test this, we would still get our 401 because I haven't fixed that. So let's fix that at the customer all operations level. So we're going to go to the all operations and we're going to add the policy. We're going to do a custom policy, and in here, we're going to add in this specific policy attribute, which is authentication managed identity resource and the app ID of the application we're hitting. So this is, again, the app registration ID for the actual function app itself that we just created a couple minutes ago. I'm just dropping that same key here. I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to give it a minute before I go crazy. So I'm going to go ahead and into the public one as well and do the same thing. Sometimes these take a minute to propagate, and then it looks like it doesn't work. And sometimes they take forever to spin up for whatever reason. This is brutal. Sorry. All right, so we're just going to recreate the same policy here. And again, I could have done this at the overall top level, but I didn't want to also include this on my vehicle. I don't think it would hurt anything, but there's no reason to. So, and again, I could have done it just specifically for one of these methods as well that would only allow one of them for whatever reason. Just to prove that that actually worked, let's go back to customers. It's had a minute to think. Let's go ahead and see if we can do this now. And hey, we got an okay. So it works. And to further prove that, then at this point, we should be able to go back into Postman, and we should be able to make our calls now back to our other functions, and everything's working again. Oops, this is the wrong, sorry. Should be on the Hampton roads. Here we go. And so again, they're all working now. So we've successfully locked down our Azure functions to only Active Directory authentication. We have given access to the APIM management through that policy to be able to authenticate against the actual Azure functions. And thereby, with our products and subscriptions, we have now locked down our Azure functions from the world, but exposed them to the correct people. The last thing I need to show you, just in case for whatever reason you were in your APIM and you didn't have the identity on. I didn't mention this earlier because I turned it on during the deployment, but if you forgot to do that, or if you have an existing one, the most critical piece before you actually try to do the app registrations and try to wire everything up is you need to go into the actual APIM itself, and you need to go to its identity. And there's a managed identities, and there you need to make sure that this is turned on and that it has a principal ID. It doesn't matter, and you don't need to do any role assignments. So don't get confused here. This isn't doing anything for you. So that's how you make sure you go back to the identity. If you don't have your managed identity on, you just create one. It takes about 30 seconds to a minute, and it'll assign one. And then once you do that, it can authenticate in the Active Directory against your Azure functions. One other thing I wanted to show you before I'm done. There's another way that these are connected to each other now as well. When I associated the API, I said create the API from the Azure Functions. You can actually do that from the Azure Function side now as well. Down here, and there's API Management. You can actually do that, and you can see I can create a new API Management instance or grab one of mine or whatever, and I can import functions and get things working. I don't know why it's not showing up with my API there, but that's brutal. The other thing is with that, once I get them wired up, where did it go? There's actually a thing under here for something like app keys. Yes. And the app keys show this is my API, and it has an app key here, and this is default and master function keys and such that are already going to be there on all function apps. But once I connected my API management, it created this one. And so if I wanted to change or rotate this key, I have to fix it on both sides. So if I renew it here, this will change the key here, but it's not smart enough to know on the APM side it also needs to do that. And so I would have to go back to the API management itself and go into, sorry, that's the app registrations. I keep getting all over the place here. Sorry. All right, we'll just do API management and grab the API management for this one. And then under here, we have these named values. And the name value key needs to map to the same thing. And we can show these as well. So you see that here, this API functions demo key ultimately is going to map to that function key that we just saw here. And if this one gets rotated, you have to go back in here and rotate this one to the same value, or you're going to not be able to connect again. So just kind of another gotcha you might run into along the way if somebody's rotating keys for security reasons. So cool. So that's pretty much the whole demo. So just a quick wrap up. Of course, we'll ask for any questions, but again, you're just going to create your resources. Ultimately, then you're going to create the APIs with the products and subscriptions and leveraging the different endpoints that you want to hit, whether it's a third party or your own. You can inject policies along the way to inject keys, or again, we did that function JSON into the query string. You're leveraging your identity within Azure to lock it down so that only your authenticated users can execute your Azure functions, and then making sure that the API management has an identity so that it can actually authenticate and execute your functions via that policy on the app ID. So that's kind of the summary on everything. Cool. So this is me, Brian at MajorGuidanceSolutions, BL Gorman at Gmail, Twitter, BL Gorman, LinkedIn, Brian L. Gorman. And again, if you want to support me, you can go out and listen to my songs on Spotify, or don't buy the book because there's a new one coming. So
whatever you do, don't buy the book.
Right. Sorry, APress. We're getting a new one though. That's why. I just would hate for someone to buy it and be like, "Aw."
You buy the book and then you buy the book again.
Well, you could do that, but yeah, you could. Sure. Sounds great. Awesome.
Good times. Brian, that was pretty good.
Okay.
I've only dabbled in API management. I haven't had a strong use case to try to use it. I've very few public-facing APIs where I've thought about using API management before. But it actually happens I have a project coming up that API management's perfect for. I'm looking very forward to using it. So this was a good primer for me.
Nice.
Jumping in there. And I do a ton with Azure Functions. Like it would seem obvious to use API management, but most of our stuff is very internal facing. So haven't really seen the need. So yeah. Good times. So there's one question about rotating the keys. I'm not sure if you see the chat in StreamYard. Sure. Could you potentially do a graph query to rotate the keys?
So I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure how that would work. I'm not super awesome with graph, but I think, if you could get access, you could do it through PowerShell easily, right? Because you can do basically anything in PowerShell. So if it's similar, or through a REST API probably, I'm guessing you could do something. So that's a really great question.
Take notes.
Yeah, I got to write it down so I can go look.
Same thing. All right. Well, now's your chance, everyone. We'll hold up for another minute or two, see if you have any questions. If not, let's see. Make sure you go follow Brian on the Twitters and whatnot.
Nice.
We need speakers for the rest of the year.
We do. Let's see, Drew. Let me throw a link up to that. HR Nug. GitHub. That's HR Nug. Organization, and let's see, we're looking for speakers. I'll drop this in the link. If you're interested in speaking with us, I mean, it's hard to top Brian Gorman. I mean, it's difficult, but you can probably do your best. We'd love to have you. There's a GitHub repo. Basically, you pick the month that you want to speak, and we'll reserve the date for you. As easy as that. If not, you have to listen to me talk, and no one wants that. Oh yeah, Brian, maybe you should come back when the new book's released.
There we go. Or I could just like sponsor you and give some out for free, right?
Hey, there you go.
Yeah.
Wait till we go back in person.
Yeah.
Whenever that happens. We were thinking about it, and now it's like, all right, Delta variant. No one's doing anything live anymore.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
We were just getting rid of Zoom. We were just getting back to it.
So close.
Ugh. It's like the carrot, just leading us astray.
Well, all righty. Well, friends, I think we'll go ahead and shut it down here. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us. Thank you, Drew, for being co-host. Thank you, Brian, for giving us a great introduction to Azure API Management with Azure Functions. Lots of good stuff. Certainly, Dev. Yes, if we go back in person, we'll still be hybrid. So we'll push stuff over Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn. Maybe not LinkedIn. LinkedIn's quality has been crap for live events. I have to go back and see what the replay looks like, but the live event is horrible. All right.
Thanks
friends,
again, guys, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, Brian. You have the link. You just come back when you feel like it.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right, friends. I'm cutting off the stream. See you all next time.
Thanks.